J.r.r. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, published in 3 parts between 1954 and 1955, changed the world of fantasy forever, but it is hard to say whether the sequel would have worked. While Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies adapted one part of the novel per movie, they captured the story's faultless progression to its eucatastrophic end. Tolkien coined the term eucatastrophe to describe a narrowly averted crisis. Funnily enough, a sequel to j.r.r. would have felt a bit like Game of Thrones and may have erased some of the effects of j.r.r.'s ending. While Amazon Prime Video's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power is set in the second age of Lord of the Rings, both of Peter Jackson's j.r.r. movie trilogies are set in the third. From The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey to The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, the New Zealand-based movies take viewers all the way up until the latest part of the Third Age. Tolkien was plotting a Fourth Age sequel to Lord of the Rings, titled The New Shadow, but its similarities to a Game of Thrones-style narrative can be noted, and may not have worked so well. J.r.r. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings sequel, New Shadow, explained. Tolkien wrote an unfinished sequel to Lord of the Rings. The New Shadow came after Aragorn's coronation in the Lord of the Rings timeline, imagining a time long after the fall of Sauron. The Third Age ended when the Rings of Power went over the sea to Valinor, leaving Middle-earth without their protection and leaving any remaining elves in Middle-earth to fade. Elves' bodies were fated to be consumed by their souls if they stayed in Middle-earth too long. This, and the loss of the Elven Rings led to the end of the Age of the Elves and the dawn of after Lord of the Rings. Elven Rings of Power left Middle-earth and the Age of Men got into full swing. Problems started to arise again, even though the Dark Lord was no more. Tolkien didn't write very much of the New Shadow, but it concerned events in Gondor in the time of Aragorn's son. It brought 2 men called Salen and Borlus together in a conspiratorial meeting, and they resolved to discuss the rise of a new human enemy that faced their kingdom. This man was called Haruma, recalling the dark figure from the Silmarillion. Tolkien's Fourth Age story makes Middle-earth too similar to Game of Thrones. The New Shadow would have had a political focus. Gandalf saying goodbye by the ship in The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. Perhaps The Lord of the Rings is best as is, in its own unique world of fairytale chivalry, without the evolution that could have come after had Tolkien published The New Shadow. The Lord of the Rings is the most long-lived and beloved high fantasy story, having carved a path for all fantasy writers to come. It defines early high fantasy as coming from a place of medieval knights and ancient warriors, influenced by Viking sagas and Norse epics. Tolkien was a scholar of Old English and Norse, and it is vital that these influences formed the foundation of modern fantasy. If Tolkien had finished and published The New Shadow, it would have been a bit like Game of Thrones. It focused on the conflict between humans, rather than the conflict between various different fantasy species. The Lord of the Rings old-school principles would have started to change in The New Shadow. This novel would have been a political game, and would have arguably been just as ahead of the curve as Lord of the Rings was, beating George R.R. Martin to his own game. But it would have been a shame for fantasy to have developed any differently. Tolkien was right to scrap his Lord of the Rings sequel. J.r.r. Tolkien sensed the enduring power of his legacy. Ian McKellen as Gandalf blocking the Balrog with his staff in Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. What made The Lord of the Rings so unique, enduring, and powerful was its hopefulness and powerful moral core, and The New Shadow would have started distracting from this legacy. While Amazon Prime Video's The Rings of Power Season 2 seemed fairly dark in tone, focusing on the rise of a villain, Lord of the Rings really distanced its readers from Sauron. It felt like a hero story, and it was founded on cosmic justice. Without ancient races like elves and dwarfs, it's hard to see how this cosmic justice could have played out in The New Shadow. Elves in The Lord of the Rings provided the central hobbit's connection to the Primeval world, created by Middle-earth as god and presided over by his demigods, the Valar. It was ancient elves like Elrond and Galadriel who harbored the knowledge of times before hobbits and men, and of a higher power greater than any evil. With this connection gone from Middle-earth, the beauty and hope of the narrative may have struggled to twinkle through the darkness. There is a place for cynical politics in fantasy, which Game of Thrones masters, and j.r.r. is best occupying another space.